Well, good evening and welcome. It's with great pleasure that we gather here tonight. We're celebrating the opening of two wonderful exhibitions, and we're beginning the museum's 10th anniversary, which is 2013. 10 years ago, we opened up in October of 2003, and so this is our 10th anniversary year. We're very proud of that. Scott's already given you some information about if you do find yourself sitting on that side to be mindful of the mural, especially if you're going to be sitting on the floor. But it looks like we've got our capacity audience at this point, though I think some more people will be joining us. Before I talk about the exhibition that I'm supposed to be talking about, I want to quickly mention that tonight you may also want to, when you're in the galleries, go visit our 1072 exhibition, which will be closing this coming weekend, Saturday. The 1072 Society is at the museum's, concerted effort to continue the legacy of building the museum's art collection through your direct support. I know many of you in the audience have already done that direct support. If you, of course, have not joined this auspicious group, yet would like to, please have a conversation with me or Dennis Harper or Cindy Cox, any of the staff during our reception tonight. We can talk to you about it. In the gallery, you'll see that there are some wonderful choices, and we would hate to have any of those paintings leave the building in a few weeks. So we're very excited about trying to get additional support for this program. So now that that commercial has been put aside, tonight we are excited to present to you two, what I think are two sensational exhibitions, Bauhaus 2021 and the painter's subjects, landscape, figure, still life. I have the pleasure of introducing the latter, which are selected works from the collection of Dwight and Helen Carlisle. This exhibition acknowledges and celebrates Dwight and Helen's commitment to the arts, to this university, and to this museum, which they helped establish over a decade ago. Their gift of the Balik collection, which you can see in our cases in the Grand Gallery tonight during the reception, was one of the museum's earliest and most treasured donations, and it undoubtedly helped establish the precedent of building a great collection for this great university. Dwight also served, many of you know this, of course, as a member of the university's Board of Trustees, and I think he did an extremely fine job of that. And we're grateful to both he and Helen for affording our museum this opportunity to share their treasures with the Auburn family, both on campus and in the community. Now, please help me welcome the museum's Curator of Collections and Exhibitions, Dennis Harper, who will introduce our speaker and our Bauhaus exhibition.
I'm a little taller. Well, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our esteemed speaker tonight, Gordon Watkinson, whose photographs and entire project, which I'll talk about in a moment, are on display in the Harper Gallery and in the Gallery C, Bauhaus 2021. While we were finishing up the exhibition installation for both shows this afternoon, doing menial jobs like hanging labels, or in my case, sweeping the floor, some random thoughts came to mind, as always, and one of those was a cliche. And now, of course, cliches are not always true, but nonetheless, sometimes they get to the point. And in this case, I'm looking around at all this wonderful art, and I think there are those people who make art, and we have a lot of that on display here. Now, I'll be careful with this cliche because it also affects me, but they say that there are those who make art, and those who can't make art often write about it. And then the sort of jabbing point is those who can do neither teach it. And so as a teacher and as a writer, I have to take some of that brunt. But in the week and a half that we've had Gordon here helping to install the exhibition, I found that I think we have to have another line to that formula, and that's that there are those who can do all three, and sometimes in that case they organize exhibitions. And Gordon is one of those. As I said, his photographs are quite remarkable, and they're the linchpin of the exhibition. But he wrote the book, Bauhaus 2021, which I hope you will have a look at in the gift shop and perhaps get a signed copy tonight. And also, he is the founder and one of the principals of the organization, Photosynthesis, that has put this exhibition together and toured it throughout Europe, and now at the first venue in the United States here in Auburn. He's a real globetrotter. When I correspond with him, at one email he's in Krakow, another he's in Berlin, the next time Stockholm, and now I'm happy to say that Auburn is on that circuit. So you'll just a brief bio note, I think. His accent notwithstanding, as you'll hear in a moment, he was born in Virginia. He actually played sports and took courses at Tulane before he finished up at VCU back in Virginia, where he was born, as I said. And then he embarked on a career of commercial photography, design, fine art photography, and then exhibition design as well, too. So I won't impose any more on his time because he has a fascinating story to tell. Instead, I'll just ask you all to please join me in welcoming to Auburn, Gordon Watkinson.
Well, Dennis makes me sound really good, doesn't he? It's a bit shocking. But I want to thank Dennis and Marilyn both very much for having me here and bringing the exhibition to Auburn. It's really been a pleasure here. Great fun. I've enjoyed the staff and I've been made to feel welcome the whole time I was here, and enjoyed a range of your barbecue restaurants as well. But anyway, let me start to talk a little bit about the exhibition, so you'll have a little idea of what you're seeing when you get in the galleries. You know, the Bauhaus was started on April 1st, 1919, and I would argue that it's probably one of the best things that's ever happened on April Fool's Day. So, just to show you a little bit about what you'll see, we picked 12 of the most iconic buildings. I worked with a man called Michael Siebenbrot, who is the head of the Bauhaus Museum in Weimar, and was also the head of the archive in Dessau, and he has lived the Bauhaus his entire life. I worked with a man called Volk Jäger, who is an architecture critic, to pick the 12 buildings, contemporary buildings, that we felt most exemplified the ideas of the original 12 buildings that Michael Siebenbrot and I worked on. And I'll just go through a few very quickly so you have a sense of how we put these together when you get into the exhibition. My favorite is the first one that they built, especially here at Auburn, because you have such a strong architecture program. And I like to torment the architects by saying the first Bauhaus building was actually made by a painter. They had a contest at the school and the painter won. So what you're seeing over here on the right is the Haus am Horn, which is the first building built in 1923 as an exhibition space to talk about the way that the Bauhaus saw life in the future and in the present. And what you see here is an example on the lower corner of the very first modern kitchen. All the kitchens up to this point were big pieces of furniture, and they started the idea of making small modular pieces that were fastened to the wall. Also in this house, you can see up at the top, there's some stains on the wall. They tried the first, what am I trying to say, thermal heating, radiant heat, and the plumbers put it in backwards so it never worked. So the leaks are still there from the original. They also were a little wild here, and they decided to put a lamp in a wall, which had never been done up until this point, and they stuck it in the bathroom for the first time, over the shower. So clearly no one got electrocuted because they tried this again later. So what we did for the 21st century is we found another exhibition space in Munich. And the way we picked the 12 contemporary buildings is there were 12 masters at the Bauhaus. 6 were German and 6 were foreign. So we picked 6 German projects and 6 foreign projects. This is an exhibition space in Munich. If you notice the Haus am Horn, it has a central living space like a classical Roman villa. And so does the exhibition space in Munich, but it's elevated this time. it's also got this exterior idea of living around in the exterior, except now it's on the ground floor with sort of rooms also in the shrubbery. I was talking to, I was giving a workshop, and I was asking the architects as part of the workshop what they thought the most expensive part of making this exhibition house was. And some of them said the roof or the systems in the house. But actually, because they had to put this together so quickly for an exhibition, the shrubbery was the most expensive thing in making the house. Not many people have to go out and buy mature shrubbery. So this is Walter Gropius's house, and we wanted to talk here about a fully designed office space. So are there a lot of architects here, or future architects? For the 21st century, we wanted one of you guys' spaces, but we came to realize that when we were searching out spaces, that whenever you're finished, you just start working on it again. So every time we picked a space from an architect or a designer, they said, oh, it doesn't look like that anymore. So here's a law office in Dusseldorf. They don't change their spaces very often. And this is the iconic Bauhaus School in Dessau. And in this, we talk about Walter Gropius's ideas about education, as well as about socializing, and then his idea of building blocks in architecture. And we talk a little bit about the 21st century building talks a little bit about Saarbrück-Hutton, a Berlin firm, and their ideas in architecture and design. And they believe that the future is that buildings like this will be the power plants, that we won't need power plants. This building makes multiple of the energy that it uses. This is the master's houses in Dessau, and again we talk about Walter Gropius's ideas of the building blocks, and we see that since the light worked in the wall in the bathroom, now they decided to stick it outside in the rain. Now, Gert Wingart is quite a well-known Swedish architect, and he created the same idea with building blocks, except he used a renewable resource in wood from Sweden. So this is why I made the project. I don't know how many people have been to Dessau or seen or know much about the Bauhaus, but this is a rarely talked about project by Walter Gropius. It's called the Turton Estates. And the reason that the Bauhaus was invited to move from Weimar to Dessau was they had a housing shortage. And Walter Gropius was a big admirer of Henry Ford. And when he went to build these houses, he used Henry Ford's assembly line methods to schedule workers and on-site prefabrication so that he could make 6 of these houses a week. And for me, this could solve a lot of problems. So to me, this rang true about how design and architecture, it can really be a social humanitarian thing. Unfortunately, we couldn't find a direct link, but we do have a man called Rolf Disch, who was a carpenter in Freiburg and went to a protest against a nuclear power plant. The protest was successful. They didn't build the plant in Freiburg. And Rolf Disch, on his way home or later on, he realized that now that he had to come up with a source of power to make up for what they lost. So since he's become one of the foremost solar architects in the world, he's a bit militant in how he travels. So we tried to get him to come to Nice to speak and called him about 2 months ahead of time so he could take his bicycle down, but he still wouldn't even do that. But these buildings are so successful that when they didn't sell as quickly as he had hoped, he even was able to sell the roofs of the buildings. The buildings are all prefabricated and use all recycled materials as well. One of the ironic stories when I was there, I asked who lived in these buildings, and they said, we weren't really sure, but suddenly we were getting a lot of people from the symphony coming in, and we said, what was the deal with that? And he had used a very experimental insulation that's quite thick, and then you bolt it onto the wall, and then it thins out. And it turns out the Freiburg Symphony had worked out that was soundproof, as well as held all the energy in the building. So now they have a disproportionate number of the Freiburg Symphony all in one place. So this is the Steel House, again by the painter, and by Richard Paulick as well. And I went to Dessau several times to photograph these buildings. And this, in the summer, is, as you can imagine, is, even in Germany, is just absolutely like an oven. And in the winter, it's like an icebox. So we found something in Spain that also uses prefabricated steel, just like this. But these guys have made perforations in the steel so that they don't need air conditioning. And so the sun only comes in when it's quite low. And they also, if I can point out, have the world's largest front door. This is a hydraulic door that when they push the garage door open, it comes all the way down and blocks this, so you can't get in. So this is Mies's apartment building in Waisenhof in Stuttgart. And Mies, they built the Waisenhof estate for the working and middle classes. And Mies said, well, one of the things that makes people move is that their lifestyle changes. They have children or things like that. So he put these walls in, and they're all movable, so you could have 4 configurations of your apartment. And Mies did this as well in his apartment buildings in Chicago. Except Mies came to figure out that the working classes of Stuttgart and the rich people in Chicago that bought his buildings had one thing in common. Nobody ever moved the walls. So Inge Wartzen in Copenhagen came up with another plan. They made 5 different floor plans inside of one building so that as your family changed, you wouldn't have to change buildings, you might just have to change floors. Unfortunately for them, they had a little of a Miesian luck. This was not in a very trendy part of Copenhagen when they started the building process. By the time they were done, it's the most trendy part of Copenhagen, so you're probably not going from the studio to the 2-bedroom. So this is also one of my favorites. This is the employment office by Walter Gropius. And it's really a great building for this project because it sort of turns that idea, that white box, rectilinear structure on its head. So Gropius made this and was really contemplating the social stigma of getting a job. So in doing so, he basically made it so that all the different trades had different doors. And if you were a male or a female, you went in a different direction. And so there was no social stigma. You never had to be seen by anybody else that worked in a different profession. He lit the building from above, so all of these are like skylights. And this is the back where the staff was that were working on the jobs. So you could come in and you would either get a job or leave with your check, but no one would ever have seen you unless they. And there's a park out front that he's designed, so you could be walking through the park and then disappear and then come back out. So in Reuter, in Austria, Hanno Volker Wernheim had a similar brief, but instead of going to the lengths that Gropius went into the early 20th century, in the 21st century, he created a building that's now used for workshops, for theatre. So you might be a kind of a semi-employed actor, but you might not be unemployed going into the building. I always tease him because his employment office, the illustration has a Porsche in it. This is the second head of the Bauhaus was a guy called Hollis Meyer, which I'm not sure how many people are familiar with here. But Hollis Meyer is not very much talked about in the West because he was labelled a communist and fired by the Bauhaus, although he never joined the Communist Party and was the only one to make the Bauhaus School profitable. So he was the kind of communist probably we're all looking for. He was asked to make a school building so that the union workers could get to know each other in 4 to 6 weeks. Meyer realized that the working classes, particularly that these union workers were coming from, would be more interested in sport than school. So he created big sort of fields and pools and gymnasiums and theatre. But what he also did is he made these 5 buildings and he put a colour on each floor. So building 1 yellow might be playing building 5 green in football on Tuesday afternoon. And that's how that he created this interaction, or the ability to interact. Now, Galli and Rudolph had a very different brief. Their brief was that they also had to create a social space in a school, but they had to do it for an international school outside of Zurich, where people were from all over the world. So instead of creating all these buildings with colors, they created very large spaces where the parents could linger when they were dropping or picking up their children from school. Which I was there when they dismissed the kids. That seems to work very well. I think most of the kids wanted to leave before the parents did. So Meyer also created this, it's called the balcony access building. And it's a very similar vernacular to what we saw in the US in the 60s and 70s for low-income housing. That didn't seem to work very well here. And the reason I would argue that it worked quite well and is still happily inhabited now in Dessau is that Meyer didn't just design the inside, he designed the exterior as well. We don't have his original plan, but we know that he created playgrounds for children, places to hang the laundry, communal gardens. So he knew that you would spend a lot of time outside. Meyer had also been to New York, where he'd seen galley kitchens as well as trash chutes. So the poorest people in Dessau had a trash chute like the richest people in New York. Now, this is another building where you have this idea of socialization outside, and it's a building by a student union just outside of Munich for students going to the University of Munich in Garching. And again, you see this idea of this exterior, but Fink and Jolke decided that what they would do in order to sort of make the building more habitable is they would run these vines up this mesh so that in the summer it would be fully enclosed and very cool, and in the winter all the leaves would fall off and it would shed a lot of light on the buildings. They also included in the cellar, they've also got a little student union with the bar, which I think is always mandatory in university settings. So this is the German pavilion, as probably every architect in this room knows by heart. And so it's really quite amazing to go there in Barcelona. Now, the 21st century building is by a guy called Graham Phillips, who I didn't realize was such a big Mies fanatic. I was quite intimidated because when I got to his house outside of London, I knew that he had been the managing partner at Foster & Partners, and he built the headquarters for the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, and you know, I had no idea what kind of person this was going to be, but I knew he'd done really huge projects. So he collected me at the train station and he said, "Gordon, I hope you don't mind, but we're going to have a cold lunch and this type of wine, and we're going to discuss design for a few hours." And I was like, okay, cool, no problem. So, but as you see, his house is the form is very much like the German pavilion. And also he spent a lot of time thinking about breaking down the barriers between architecture and nature, much like Mies. Now, one thing I'll point out, whenever I went to a project where it was the architect's house, they always had a guest house that now is occupied by their teenage children. This is the Villa Tugendhat, and in the workshop I was also teasing the architecture students about this. This is, Mies did the German pavilion and then got the assignment for this, and the German pavilion, he had a budget working for his country, but this was a newlywed couple of the two richest families in the Czech Republic. They had no budget. So Mies, in order to break down the barriers between architecture and nature here, just put a glass wall up that with a push of a button you could drop into the cellar. So that was really easy. And the button still works today because I didn't want him to use it, but the caretaker was there and he insisted on showing me despite the fact that it snowed an hour earlier before I got there. And the 21st century example of all this technology is the Zübeck house. And this is a zero energy house. It was put up in about 3 weeks. It can be recycled in about 10 days. Herr Zübeck is not just working on breaking down the barriers between architecture and nature, he's also working on breaking down barriers vertically and horizontally inside of his buildings. This building has more privacy than you think when you see this photograph. It's actually got 3 sides of hills and only one side sort of looks out on Stuttgart. Frau Zübeck does not like people to wear shoes in her house. So when you enter the door up here on this gate, there's a drawer that comes out full of shoes. So you get the hint right away without them having to say very much. Anyway, this house is kind of scandalous in Germany. That it's been written about in the papers numerous times that they really don't think they live here. But I can tell you, there's a bathtub here, and I saw water in it when I came in. So I think at least someone's bathing there if no one's living there. So anyway, this is kind of the crux of what you'll see in the other room. And if you guys have any questions, I'll be there to answer them as best I can. And I really appreciate you coming out this evening. Thank you very much. Sorry, do you want to take questions in here? Okay, sorry. I figured. No problem.
Maybe I'll jump in first, and I think the obvious question might be, why architecture as the subject of your photographs?
Oh, right.
What led you to that?
You know, I was always kind of a furniture fanatic. And then I ended up in Dessau, and there was no furniture in Dessau. I didn't realize that till I got there, of course. And like I said, I saw the village, I saw the Turton estates. And I really understood, you know, the power of architecture and design to really change people's lives. And I was hooked. Any other questions? If you have embarrassing ones, you can ask me in the other room. Oh, go ahead. Oh, you don't have to raise your hand. You know, he's basically doing it with just solar. I mean, you know, the systems that they're using in Germany now, I mean, I saw a similar question. He spoke at a series in New York where I live, Herr Zubeck and Herr Sauerbruck from the environmental officers in the project. And they were trying to reference this LEED rating that they have in the US, and they said we're so far above that already. I mean, most of the new buildings in Germany don't have air conditioning. The environmental office is geothermal and solar. I think this is just solar. This is why I photographed their teenage son's bedroom in the guest house. I don't think it has geothermal because they wouldn't have been able to assemble the house so quickly. So I really think it's really efficient glass construction and then solar.
Could you talk a little bit about the day-to-day goings on at the Bauhaus and what they do with the classrooms?
Well, it's a school. You know, they taught art, they had a metal workshop, they had a weaving workshop, they had a wood workshop. The thing that they didn't teach right away was architecture. You know, that only came later with Hollis Meyer. You know, Gropius thought that all of the crafts would lead to architecture, so he didn't bother, even though his office was at the school. You want me to go into more detail? Well, yeah, basically there was you know a lot of what seems to be here at Auburn. You know, that they were thinking and they were doing. You know, it wasn't a theoretical place. It was a place where you designed things and you made them, and they produced them. You know, and under Meyer they produced them and sold them, which is what made the school profitable. But you have, you know, some of these really iconic things from Mariana Brandt, the lamps, and the famous ashtray and the cocktail shaker all come from their time here. Yeah, they had to have a little fun, you know.
Why did the Bauhaus movement get started, and how did the Great War affect it?
Which Great War? It started in 1919. It's just after. Just after. Well, I'll tell you, I can answer that, though, just the same. You know, Gropius fought in World War I. His family were soldiers and architects. The Martin Gropius Bau in Berlin was built by his uncle. But he fought in the war, and his entire unit, except for him, was wiped out. And I think that heavily influenced the way he thought about humanity inside of architecture and design. I also think it influenced, you know, the Bauhaus did not have this kind of overarching utopian umbrella. I mean, there were, like I said, he brought in 6 masters from the outside. Itten came from Vienna, and apparently Itten fought with Gropius every single day. You know, and Itten was like a guru. He had his head shaved, he wore robes, he was a vegetarian, he was trying to dictate the food they had, everything. And I think Gropius' tolerance came from the fact that, you know, he'd seen a lot of carnage. And I think that really influenced the way that the school progressed and his openness to new ideas. Does that answer all your question, I hope? Sure. Go ahead. Actually, they're black, white, and blue. I used a film called Polar Pan originally, starting the project. And one thing I wanted to achieve is I wanted people just to see the form. Because the original color palette in Weimar came from the Goethe summer house, which was already dirty in 1990 when these guys were working it out. So you would identify immediately which was old and which was new if I photographed these in color. And I wanted to have a lot of ambiguity in dealing with the forms. Oh, go ahead.
In America, the house, why the house, does the house only one floor? And one floor, the first floor open is most.
Is the master's house? The first floor? Which one? Here?
Only one floor.
Oh, in the house in Horn? In America?
The house only one floor.
In America? I live in New York. I have no idea about this sort of horizontal living.
The first floor open is noisy.
Oh, it's damp. Oh, right. In the United States. Yeah, I don't know. It's damp in New York because we just had a big hurricane. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not an architect. I'm really just a photographer. Sorry, go ahead.
Have you ever used infrared film?
I have, and I like the grain of that as well. But one I liked better. I don't know if you remember this old film. They made something called recording film that basically had the grain size of a golf ball, and I thought that was quite good.
Well, I was wondering if the infrared would show some of the thermal properties that you discussed in your presentation.
One of the things that you'll see in the exhibition, and part of what I'm explaining, is I sort of turned everybody loose to do their own thing. The architects, the contemporary architects, the only criteria they had is they had to write, we wanted them to write about the Bauhaus generally and its influence on their work, not specifically on the project. I decided that I wouldn't illustrate anything that we were talking about, that I wanted you to focus on the form and the aesthetic of the buildings, so that you could determine for yourself if you thought they were relevant today or not. I mean, like this Villa Tugendhat, I mean, if you were in the hills of Hollywood, I mean, with the wall coming down, I thought that would be pretty incredible. So I didn't really want to just have people talking to such specific things, and because I really hope this would be more of a conversation starter than sort of some sort of final definitive answer to any questions. Does that make sense? I hope.
How was the selection of the modern buildings, apart from what you just described, how was the selection made of the 12 modern?
Oh, you have to feel sorry for him. Dr. Falk Jaeger, like I said, is an architecture critic in Berlin, and I had been to all of these houses, and even more than Michael Siebenbrot had been to, and so he would kind of quiz me on really the ones that he didn't know what we needed to look for, and then he would go and research in the Berlin University Library where he taught. And then he would send me some scans and say, what do you think? And I'd go, okay, it doesn't have this or it doesn't meet that. That poor man, he thought he was going to be doing this for about 2 or 3 weeks. And I think he was doing it for about 5 months. He was like, I've got a cot in the library, Gordon. Can you get finished with this?
Well, what did Bauhaus Group do to offend the Nazis?
You know, it was the interesting thing. They didn't just offend the Nazis; they also offended the Russians as well. Yeah, I learned this by photographing one building just outside of Berlin, and it turns out that it was built for a Jewish family, and when they left, the Nazis used it as a stable, and when they pushed the Nazis out, the Russians came in and they used it to park their cars. So neither of them really liked it. I think this idea of blurring the lines of classes and this idea of not putting all these motifs on the buildings that, you know, if you ever go to Berlin, Richard Paulick, who's part of this project in the historic side, stayed in the GDR and built this group of apartments called Karl Marx Allee. They're modernist buildings, but then they have all these kind of workers' reliefs at the top, so they illustrated some sort of propaganda. And I think these were propaganda-free. They didn't show, you know, the things that exemplified a great German house. I mean, this house here, the house in Horn, when they built it in Dessau, this little house here that's you know, has ideas of passive solar. They've made it, you know, work for the sun. Next door, the government of Weimar builds this 3-story monster and says, this is a German house, and that we don't know what it is. You know, the Nazis as well, in Weisenhof, I don't know if you've ever seen these postcards, the Nazis made a postcard that showed Weisenhof with camels and sort of Bedouins sitting outside. They said, this is not Germany, this is the Middle East. So, you know, I think they were equal opportunity offenders. Any other questions? Sure, go ahead.
Are you aware if most of these 12 original houses have maintained their life since they were first done?
Well, I photographed them to, you know, in this century. So.
Did they ever go through a downtime?
Well, I can tell you, the worst downtime was here. We dropped a few bombs in this courtyard, and the glass curtain wall on the other side was knocked out. Dessau was a very industrial city, and the Junkers airplane factory was there. Also, a factory that made Zyklon B was there. And so in the war, Dessau was 80% destroyed. The interesting thing is only one of the master's houses was hit, Gropius' house, but he was teaching at Harvard safely by then. And then the courtyard here was damaged, but the interesting thing is that Honecker ended up rebuilding this. So, you know, I guess clearly the communists softened before it was over.
Tell what that line down the hall is. Lower right.
This one? Oh, so any of you architects want to take a guess at what this is? So front and center in Zaubrück Hutton's building is the Guide for the Blind. It's really clever what they did. The docents got a 2.5-hour tour, so they know. Anybody have any more questions? Go ahead.
I was interested in as far as the movement of the going forward and what's happening going forward with these types of designs and efforts.
Do you mean formally or as far as what's happening now? Well, I mean, all these other projects are all built in the 21st century. And these are, to me, you know, we picked, particularly these two are interesting because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a formal idea moving forward, that it was the theoretical idea behind the buildings. You know, and that Zaubrück is very fascinating because their whole mantra behind architecture is about energy production. And Gropius is about building blocks and modular architecture. So we wanted to really talk about philosophy and the way that Gropius dealt with this big staircase here. I don't know if you've seen the Feininger painting of the students on the staircase, but that was really his idea about how the students were going to socialize. And, you know, these guys built all these bridges, Zauberg Hutton, so that the workers could socialize in the environmental office. And, you know, these two buildings are not 500 yards away from each other. Did I answer your question? Oh, good. Okay. Go ahead.
Was there any new material released in the Bauhaus that previous architects would have not considered?
You know, one of the things that was really important to the Bauhaus that I learned in talking to people was that they really wanted to use off-the-shelf materials. They didn't really, you know, they would prefabricate things, but then they would want to put it into production. They didn't want to create these kind of super expensive, even Mies in the Villa Tugendhat, you know, you can see the labels on all of these amazing things that you know, systems that he put in the house. So, I mean, they were really sort of ordering off the shelf. But I'll tell you one thing that amazed me that is not a new material, but an old material. In this building, Meyer, I worked with Brenner to get into some of these buildings, who is a Berlin architecture firm that helped with the restoration of the school, the master's houses, and both the Meyer buildings. And they said that they only had to make one architectural change to this building. They had to put a heater over some glass blocks that were in the ceiling over the canteen to deal with the condensation problem. But they were showing me inside of these walls that Meyer had built these so well that the peat was still good that was used for the insulation. It was still moist. So they used some old materials, I think, pretty well. Generally, I photograph most things flat, if I can. But my main objective is to photograph things in a way that you would see them. I cheated once. I'll show you where. This you wouldn't see because I had to climb a hill. But the rest, I really am conscious of taking photographs from a place and an angle that you would be oriented to when you got there. I don't want to sort of take some extreme angle and then suddenly you don't realize the size of the building that you're in. You know, it was nice. I was going to Copenhagen, and this room here is tiny. And the architect met me in Copenhagen, and he said, "I'm so happy that you're not going to stand in the corner of my purposefully designed small room and try to make it look like a palace." So some people like it. I guess some people don't. Does that make sense? Okay. You know, I'm a left-handed dyslexic, so I'm going to ask that question a lot. You know, sometimes it won't. Anybody else? You know, no students from the workshop have any questions? I figured you would have trick questions by now.
Maybe they're too shy. And they can
That's it?
ask you questions in the gallery.
Okay, that sounds good.
In the grand gallery.
Okay.
Join us for the reception. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you.